Hey everyone, welcome back, ready for another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring some fascinating ideas about soul evolution. We're digging into excerpts from The Soul Flow to Happiness. This book, it kind of shakes up those conventional ideas we have about success and happiness, suggesting, maybe chasing money and achievements isn't really the best way to feed your soul.
It's funny. What really struck me is how the book argues that your ego and your soul, well, they often want very different things. It really makes you stop and think.
Hmm.
Like, what's really driving me?
Yeah, it's like this constant internal tug of war, isn't it? Okay, so let's start with the basics. When this book talks about soul evolution, what does it actually mean? Like, are we talking about reaching, I don't know, some ultimate state of enlightenment or something?
Not necessarily. It's not really about reaching a specific endpoint, like enlightenment. The soul flow to happiness defines soul evolution more as this ongoing process, this continuous self-discovery. Think of it like a journey of learning and growth where you're constantly aligning your life with your true nature, and finding your purpose.
So it's less about reaching a destination and more about the journey itself. But it sounds like this book is saying a lot of us might be on the wrong path, huh? Focus on stuff that doesn't actually help our souls grow.
Absolutely. The book, it argues that many of us, we kind of misunderstand the whole point of life. We chase external achievements, possessions, status, thinking that's the key to happiness. But real fulfillment, well, it might actually lie within.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in chasing those external things,
Yeah.
especially nowadays, right?
Yeah.
But how do we even know if our goals are more like ego-driven or soul-driven? That seems like a pretty important distinction to make.
It is. And the book, it gives you some really insightful questions to help you figure out what's motivating you. Like, for example, it asks, if nobody else was watching, would this still be important to me? That question can really help you uncover if a goal is, genuinely aligned with your soul or just driven by wanting external validation.
Ooh, that's a good one. It's like holding up a mirror to your motivations,
Yeah.
right? So let's talk about materialism,
Yeah.
the pursuit of possessions and status.
Yeah.
This book, it doesn't seem too fond of that.
Right. It straight up criticizes the idea that material wealth and social standing, that those things should be our main goals in life. It's not that these things are bad. It's more about recognizing that they won't bring you lasting happiness if they're your only focus.
It's all about balance, isn't it?
Mm.
I mean, we all need a certain level of material comfort and security. But when those things take over, that's when we might be veering off course.
Exactly. And the book offers some really interesting insights into how our modern culture often pushes us to put material stuff ahead of soul growth. Like how advertising bombards us with messages saying that happiness means owning the latest gadgets or wearing designer clothes.
Yeah, it's like we're constantly being told we need more to be happy. So then the book introduces this idea of the ego being a potential obstacle to soul evolution. Does that fit in?
So the book describes the ego as that part of us that's all about self-preservation and image. It craves validation from others, always seeks pleasure, avoids pain, and it can often lead us, well, kind of astray from our soul's path.
It's interesting because it seems like the ego really thrives in that environment of wanting more,
Yeah.
constantly comparing ourselves and looking for validation from others. So we're basically feeding the ego when we prioritize those materialistic pursuits.
Exactly. And the book suggests that the ego, it can be pretty sneaky in its attempts to keep us focused on external stuff. It might whisper those thoughts like, you're not successful enough, or you need this thing to be happy.
It's like it's trying to convince us that we need those things for our well-being when really they might be holding back our souls. So how do we start to recognize those desires that are coming from the ego and separate them from our soul's true desires?
Well, the book recommends paying attention to your feelings. Like, ask yourself, does this goal, this desire, does it bring me a sense of peace, a sense of fulfillment, or does it make me feel anxious, like I'm never enough? If it's the latter, well, it could be a sign that your ego is in the driver's seat.
So it's almost like we need to tune into our intuition and pay attention to those subtle emotional cues. If something feels off or not quite right, it's probably worth exploring. But the book doesn't actually say we should get rid of the ego completely, does it?
No, not at all. Actually, it acknowledges that the ego is important. We need a healthy ego to function in the world. It helps us set boundaries, make decisions, navigate our daily lives. The key, according to the book, is to learn how to manage the ego, to not let it completely run the show.
So it's that balance again, right? Letting the ego play its part, but not letting it control our every thought and action. So how do we actually start to shift that dynamic? How do we go from being ego-driven to living a life that's, more in tune with our souls?
Well, that's where the concept of living your soul comes in, and that's what we'll be exploring next. So
Hmm.
living your soul, as the Soul Flow to Happiness puts it, it's about understanding your unique gifts and talents, like what makes you, you, and then expressing those things authentically out in the world. It's about aligning what you do with your values and pursuing what really feels meaningful to you personally.
Okay, so that makes sense. But how do we actually figure out what those gifts and talents are? Some people just seem to know what their purpose is right from the start.
Yeah.
But for others, it might not be that obvious.
You're right. That's a struggle a lot of people have. And the Soul Flow to Happiness actually talks about that. It offers different exercises and practices. One suggestion is to think back to your childhood. Like, what activities did you naturally enjoy? What made you happy? A lot of times, our natural talents kind of show up when we're kids.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like looking for those early signs to see, what really spoke to us before the world started telling us what we should be doing.
Exactly. And the book also says it's important to notice what give you energy as an adult. Like, what activities make you feel alive and engaged? What are you drawn to naturally? Those can be clues about what your soul is calling you to do.
So it's a combination of looking back and, tuning into what excites us now. Like that's like a treasure hunt for your soul's purpose. But even when we get a sense of what our gifts are, sometimes it can be scary to actually put ourselves out there and express them authentically.
That's true. And the book acknowledges that fear is a big obstacle. It says that our egos often create these limiting beliefs that hold us back. We might get worried about what people think or be afraid of failure or, getting rejected.
It's that ego again, always trying to keep us playing it safe. But it seems like the book is also saying that pushing through those fears, that's essential for our soul's growth.
Exactly. The Soul Flow to Happiness really emphasizes the importance of courage and resilience. It encourages us to get out of our comfort zones and take risks, even if it feels uncomfortable at first.
Yeah, it's about being vulnerable and trusting that we can do more than we think we can. But it's not always easy, right? I mean, we're talking about challenging some pretty deep-seated patterns and beliefs.
It's definitely a process. It takes dedication to self-reflection and inner work. But the Soul Flow to Happiness gives us some really helpful advice on how to handle those challenges. For instance, it talks about practicing self-compassion and learning to quiet that inner critic.
Right? We can't really expect to make progress if we're constantly beating ourselves up. We need to be kind to ourselves to support our growth. But what about our environment? Does the book say anything about how our surroundings affect our soul's evolution?
Oh, that's a great question. The Soul Flow to Happiness definitely recognizes how much our environment impacts us. It suggests that being around people who encourage our growth and creating a space that aligns with our values can be super beneficial.
So it's not just about the internal work. It's also about consciously shaping our external world to support our soul's journey. That's a really good point.
It is. The book also talks about how important it is to find meaning and purpose in our work. It says that work can be a really powerful way to express our unique gifts and contribute to the world.
That's a cool perspective. A lot of people see work as just something they have to do to make money. But the soul flow to happiness seems to be saying it can be much more than that.
You got it. It encourages us to find work that aligns with our values and lets us use our talents in a way that feels purposeful and fulfilling. It's about moving from that mindset of just making a living to making a difference.
I love that. And I think that ties in with the book's idea of being a luminescent light. Can you tell us more about what that means?
That's one of the most inspiring parts of the book, The Soul Flow to Happiness. It says that as we grow and become more aligned with who we truly are, we naturally become a source of light and inspiration for others. It's like our inner light gets brighter and illuminates the path for those around us.
I love that imagery.
Uh,
So it's not about trying to force ourselves to be something we're not
mhm.
or like trying to be some big hero. It's about the natural ripple effect that happens when we're living in sync with our souls.
Exactly. And the book stresses that this luminosity doesn't have to be about big, grand gestures. It can show up in the smallest things, like saying something kind to someone who's having a bad day, or really listening to a friend who needs to talk, or even just being our authentic selves.
Yeah, it's like those small acts of kindness and authenticity. They can create a ripple effect that goes way beyond us. But the book also suggests that this luminosity isn't just about inspiring others. It's about finding a deeper sense of joy and fulfillment within ourselves too, right?
You got it. The soul flow to happiness argues that when we align with our soul's purpose and express our unique gifts, we experience this deep sense of joy and satisfaction. It's a feeling that comes from being true to ourselves.
It's like that inner tug of war we talked about earlier. It finally ends and we find peace and harmony within ourselves.
Exactly. And that's what the soul flow to happiness ultimately points us towards, a path to lasting happiness that comes from self-discovery, authenticity, and living a life that aligns with our soul's purpose.
That's a really powerful message.
Yeah.
But as we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive, I think it's important to remember that this whole soul evolution thing, it's not always a walk in the park. There are going to be bumps in the road.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. The book doesn't sugarcoat that. It acknowledges that growth can be uncomfortable, and there will be times when we feel lost and unsure of ourselves.
You know, it's really interesting how this book, The Soul Flow to Happiness, frames soul evolution. It's not just about our own personal journey, but also about how it impacts, the world around us.
Yep.
That whole luminescent light idea really stuck with me. What do you think are some, practical ways we can shine our light brighter? Not in a, showy way, but in a way that actually helps other people.
That's a great question. And I think, the book really emphasizes that it's often the little things that have the biggest impact. Like it could be something as simple as giving a genuine compliment to someone who seems down, or just, really listening to a friend who's going through a tough time, or volunteering for a cause you care about.
Those are all great examples, and it actually reminds me of something the book mentioned before, the idea that our work can be like an outlet for our soul's expression.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any real-life examples of people doing that? People who really seem to be aligning their work with their soul's purpose.
Oh, tons. I think about, teachers who are truly passionate about helping their students learn and grow, or artists who, use their creativity to inspire people, or entrepreneurs who create businesses that solve real problems and make a positive difference in the world. You can just tell they're not just in it for the money. There's like a deeper purpose driving them.
It's like their work becomes this extension of their soul's purpose, a way to share their unique gifts with everyone. It makes you wonder if more of us could find that kind of fulfillment in what we do.
I think so. And the book offers some really helpful tips on how to do that. It encourages us to, think about our values, identify our strengths, and then explore careers that match both. Maybe it means, a big career change, or maybe it's just finding ways to bring more meaning into what you're already doing.
It's about finding that sweet spot where what we're passionate about and what we're good at meets what the world needs.
Mhm.
But before we wrap up our deep dive into the soul flow to happiness, I wanted to circle back to the ego for a minute. The book often talks about the ego as this potential roadblock to soul evolution, almost like it's our enemy. But what if instead of, fighting against the ego, what if we learn to work with it, like integrate it into our journey?
That's an interesting idea, and I think the book actually kind of hints at that possibility. Remember, the ego isn't inherently bad. It's a part of us, right? It's that part of us that has desires, that strives for things, that wants to, experience life and create.
Yeah, it's our drive, our ambition, our desire to make our mark on the world.
Exactly. And those qualities, they can be really powerful when they're aligned with our soul's purpose. Just imagine harnessing that ego-driven energy and focusing it on goals that are not only fulfilling for you, but also, beneficial for others.
It's like transforming the ego from a possible obstacle into a powerful partner on this path of soul evolution.
Exactly. Instead of always battling with it, we learn to work with it, to
Right.
guide it, to use its energy to help us grow and make a positive impact on the world.
So as we close out our deep dive into the soul flow to happiness, I want to leave you with this question. How can you integrate your ego and your soul? How can you take your drive and your ambition and use them to create a life that's both fulfilling for you and makes a difference for others?
This journey of soul evolution, it's a lifelong adventure, Embrace the highs and the lows, explore your own unique path, and never, ever underestimate the power of your light to inspire and, make the world a brighter place.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into soul evolution. Until next time, keep searching, keep growing, and keep shining your light.